Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to be cutting back a few perennials in the garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, Zone 7B. We're right here at the beginning of February. A lot of our native perennials we leave up through the winter. So anything like this Joe Pye weed that I'm about to prune back, we're leaving seeds here for the birds, leaving places for insects, pollinators to hide during the winter, just kind of leaving the garden standing through the winter. Leaves are on the ground, just kind of letting the garden do its natural thing through the winter. But we do mulch in February, and so I want to get it cleaned up now, and I also want to get things cut back before new growth starts to make it harder. Once new growth comes up in the middle of the plant, it becomes, a little more challenging to get in there and clean them up at that point. So this is about the time we do it right now, what we would call late winter here in Raleigh, maybe not late winter, where you're watching from, that may be a little later, another month or so. But the only things we cut back in the fall would be things that are potentially have diseased foliage. So if you have things like bee balm or upright phlox, peonies might be on that list, anything that's susceptible to disease issues that you don't want to carry in the garden through the winter. So you can, as soon as they get nipped in the fall, you can cut those back and get it disposed of quickly, hopefully not transferring as much of it as readily to the next season. But anything that's healthy, like this dwarf Joe Pye weed, we just leave it in place, and right about now we cut it back. Two ways to kind of dispose of this. We can throw it we can cut it into smaller pieces and throw it on a compost pile, which we have a pile back here that we're accumulating things in very rapidly. If it's not diseased, I will typically, more often than not, we're using good, clean, sharp tools for this job. I'm more likely than not, I just broke that one off by accident, I'll cut these down and leave nubs about 2 inches up from the ground, okay? So that's what I'll do, and we'll get a close-up of that in just a second. But I'm as likely on something like this, because I'm about to mulch, to go through and just take this thing and cut it into 3-4 inch segments and just leave it in the bed. What's the difference between this and any other mulch, as long as it's not diseased material? And we'll just mulch right over top of that. Frequently, we'll mulch a plant with its own material. And again, it's just material that's going to to benefit that plant. It's its own nutrients that it used last year, and this is exactly what it would do in nature, right? This material will die back completely as the new material comes up, and it will use the same nutrients it used last year. And so, again, in about 2 weeks, this won't look like a mess, because we're going to get everything cut, all the pruning we're going to do, all the weeding we're going to do, all the edging we're going to do, and then we're going to mulch this space. And so that's one technique. If you don't want to do that, again, you can cut them off, cut them down to some reasonable size, throw them on your compost bin, and do it that way. But again, I'll just go through and I want to leave about 2 or 3 inches, if Steph can get in here a little closer. I want to leave about 2 or 3 inches, up to 4 inches or so here, because I want to know where it is. I don't want to, I'm going to mulch here in a week or so, and I want to know where it is, so I'm not rolling a wheelbarrow over it at that time, or damaging it in some other way. So we'll leave some remnant of it in place, and again use it to mulch itself going into next year. But we have there's a lot of things back here that need pruning, and almost immediately the space looks better when you start taking some of these things down. We'll, over the next 2 weeks, change the look of this space, and of course things will start waking up as well, and we'll look better in general. But let's move around and take a look at some other things as well. Here's an Agastache that got very large in the garden last year. Again, this is something that had pollinators on it right up until the beginning of December. This thing was still in flower. Birds have been on it. Again, it's offered some structure in the garden through the winter. And to me, it's just interesting to leave them standing. I don't mind that the garden goes to sleep. We have a lot of evergreen things out here, and we have a lot of things that with interesting structure, interesting weeping habits, again, evergreen things. I have enough of those things out here that I don't mind, something looking, like it's supposed to kind of look in the wintertime, right? So again, one other thing you're gonna find is when you get into their beds like this and you're working, you'll be able to see some weeds and things this time of year that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. So right up under this is ivy that's creeping up under it, right? So it's a good opportunity for me to get this out of here and you know, eliminate this before it really became a problem up under here. So it's another thing I'm on the lookout for when I'm doing this. We have tags on most of these things, so if something did happen to this during the winter and we didn't know where it was, there's still a tag sitting there for pretty much everything. But again, this is just a matter of going through, cutting them down to about 3 inches or so in height. If it's something that's really, really thick, like this one right here, you know, this may not be something that I can cut with my hand pruners and not dull them. So, you know, that may end up on a different type of pile. But the rest of this stuff, again, I'm just going to go through exactly like I did on the other one and turn it into free mulch, right? Because this will be sitting up under my, probably should maybe have eye protection for these. But this will be, this material will just be sitting right up underneath the plant, feeding its own nutrients from last year. And again, it's going to look messy for about 2 weeks, and then it's going to look polished and fantastic. If you guys are subscribed to the channel, you'll see all the pruning that's going to be done in the next few weeks, and then, you know, the finished product here by the end of February to go into spring. But talking and trying to concentrate on this at the same time. But again, I just spread all this material out underneath, and mulch will go over top of it. Big chunky pieces like this I'll probably throw in the compost pile. Some of your perennials don't necessarily play all that nice in the garden with other things. This rhythm and blues salvia has been here for a couple seasons, and it has decided to spread out into other things. And so at the same time I'm pruning it back, I'm looking at how far it had spread out last season. You know, it's up in this cedar, this weeping cedar right here. And so I'm actually just gonna go underneath that and pop that completely out of the ground. Look at this right here. I've got a whole new salvia right there. The root, totally viable. I could put this in a container, give it to a neighbor, but that right there, you know, I cut it back right now and plant it in a container. I got a whole new plant right there. There's another one that went, you know, right beside it, right there. Again, it's this time of year, it's super easy to be doing this kind of work because the ground is very workable. But right there, look at that. That's a whole new plant, guys, just like that. Salvia rhythm and blues. I'll cut the top off of it, and you can see right there, it's got all its stored energy down here. Got beautiful new white roots starting to grow on it because the ground temperature is warming up a bit. But that would go in a container, and given for us, given to a neighbor. We just don't have a heck of a lot of room out here. But I'm looking for this thing again. Here's another spot where it's just traveled. It's traveled too far. You think I'm mean to this thing, but this is one of those almost unkillable perennials. There you go. All right, look how easy that is to get out of the ground and to make new plants from. And I still have plenty. In fact, too many. This is where we planted it originally. So anything that's moved outside of this space, I want it cut back. And here's a spot right behind this holly, which is definitely going to be distracting. Put those pruners down. This one's a little more vigorous here. Okay. So there you go. And again, just cut back last year's stems off of it, and boom, I got another plant just like that. It's a great salvia. The birds absolutely positively love it. Got some wires from the fountain coming up there, right there. And there's one more. Okay. So I think that's probably good enough. I've got it down to where I want it. It's going to try to come up a bit more right out of the gate in the spring, and we'll cut it back some then. But now I'll just go through here and again cut it down to about 3 inches high. These have hollow stems, and so I don't cut these back in the fall, not necessarily leaving these for any other reason than if I cut some of these hollow stem perennials back in September, October, November, water can easily get down in there and crack it a little lower down in the ground. And so I'm kind of careful with that as well. Some of the, some perennial things can fall victim to that. But again, I'm just gonna go through here, leave about 3 inches up above the ground so I can see it. And I'm gonna have to offer a little more control to it when it comes up this spring. There's a full-blown stick right there. But again, I'm gonna go through here exactly like I've been showing you. Cut it to about 3 inches, pile this material up, cut it down in place, let that be part of my mulch. Again, it's all about trying to save some money here. It wasn't diseased, it had no insect problems. So I'm not concerned that it's gonna cause next year's plant any problems at all. Another category of perennial is what I call the mushy perennial, the ones that just turn to mush in the fall or in the winter when it gets really cold. This farfugium is a great example of that. It just kind of becomes, you know, it's every bit of this plant is soft, it's not woody, so it just becomes a mushy mess on the ground. Hosta do that as well, but by this time of winter, they've kind of cleaned themselves up and it's all disappeared. But this farfugium is already putting on new growth from the base. And so I want to get rid of any remaining parts of this from around it. This was probably a job for gloves here, because it is a kind of a weird sensation in the hands because it is truly mushy. Okay, so any of that, I'm just going to get it cut back, cleaned up. I'm leaving enough of it above the ground though that I can still see it. The leaves are too thick back here under this giant oak tree, so before we mulch, we're actually going to come back in here and thin the leaves out here and distribute them into some other areas that don't have leaves, and then we'll mulch over top of that. But currently, like up on my perennials here, a lot of my perennials are just kind of buried in leaves, which have offered them some protection during the winter time. But now, you know, that I want to mulch, if I add 3 more inches, they're truly going to be buried. So we'll go through here with a rake, thin these leaves out some. This cast iron plant, typically my pruning on these is just to take about 1/3 of the oldest growth out. So typically I'd have leaves that look like this, you know, about 1/3 of them would look like this, maybe a little bit more. And we just cut those down to the ground as the new growth is emerging in the spring. But look what happened this year. We had a nasty cold spell in December and it damaged the entire plant. So all of my cast iron plants kind of look like this. Probably wouldn't have happened as much if they'd have been more mature. These are only in the ground maybe 18 months or so. So I'm actually going to go through here, being careful looking down here at the bottom, that I'm not cutting off any new growth that might already be trying to pop out. And I'm going to cut these down. I'm just going to disappear this plant basically. But there's nothing on it that I want to keep this year. This is a little earlier than I would normally do this, but I'm just kind of showing you, you know, how I go about this every year, and it's not gonna hurt it really at this point in the winter. But you can do this. You can cut them 100% back like this, or you can just selectively prune them. This particular year, I'm cutting it back 100% because it's, you know, it all looks bad. Here's another farfugium. A lot of you might know these by ligularia. Farfugium was removed from ligularia. Farfugium tend to be hardier in the south, and the ligularia that are left in ligularia are more cold hardy. They're actually semi-evergreen. The one I showed you over there sometimes will make it through the winter without the kind of damage that I showed you, but you'll see, you know, some of this will make it through. So, you know, we wait until, again, mid to late winter and, you know, decide what needs to come off. So the flower heads are coming off at this point. Pollinators absolutely love these right up through till we got that super, super cold weather. And I'll go through here, just selectively get in here and clean anything up that's, you know, the oldest part. If there's damaged leaves, I can go ahead and cut those, you know, down to the ground, which, you know, again, this is more damaged than it typically would have been, but it's not ultimately going to hurt it. It's already showing signs of new growth. Here's another native. This is a purple coneflower. And again, we left it up big and tall through the winter, and the seeds have just been picked clean, mostly by goldfinches. Goldfinches are constantly out here on these during the summer, late summer, right through fall, doing that. But they've gotten all the seed they want off of it at this point. And again, so I'm just going to come in here, you know, cut it 3 inches above the ground and turn it into its own mulch. I got to go through here and clean up this bed, edge it, cut these perennials back. I've got some weeds that are under here that I can see while I'm doing this. So again, I'm looking at, weeding the bed at the exact same time and, making these part of next year's fertilizer basically out here. So I've got, again, this is Rudbeckia, and then if Steph can start to slide this way, there's another Agastache here. I don't even remember. Some of it ties back to the ground, and you can't even remember anymore. It's another coneflower. It's a small one. We do a lot of these from seed, and so the first year, they'll stay pretty small out here. There's a whirling butterfly right here, and sometimes these will you got to be careful with some of these. They'll be so fragile down toward the ground that you can break them off accidentally. So, I'm careful with that. But they can be kind of loose in the ground. Sometimes they'll crack underneath from the cold. I just don't want to cause any additional damage to them underneath there. So I'm careful just to leave about 3 inches, just like that. Again, this Agastache, same thing. And all of this is just going to become mulch out here. My agave has some significant damage from that cold, but it's got lots of new growth in the middle. It's still quite solid. I'm going to wait to clean this up until it really starts to put on some new growth in the next few weeks. Fall asters. Here's an aster right here. This is another native. Okay, this one is flopped over. The rabbits had pruned this thing up into this little tree form right here. And again, these native plants like this have great seeds for birds through the winter time, and then they just become their own mulch here in the early spring in the garden. We have lots of salvias out here. This one we had a support on toward the end of the season, so I'll make sure I take that out. What you just saw out by the street is my actual technique for breaking this stuff down. I was showing it with the hand pruners early in the video just so I could kind of talk it through, but I actually will just start up at the top on something like this and just take 3-4 inches, maybe 6 inches off of it at the time, and then you can tie it together and make it even quicker work of it. But this is how I actually do it. This is how I make mulch out of old perennials in the garden. And again, mulch is just going to go right over the top of them. I may have to rake it here or there a little bit ultimately, but this is how I actually go about doing it. And you can use, I've got a pair of gas shears in the shop that if they weren't so noisy at 7:30 in the morning out here, I might have those out here as well. Once it gets down to where it's really super woody, you may need a heavier tool to do it, but ultimately I want to get down to where this thing is maybe 6 or 8 inches in height, like that. Boom, it'll just come right back up from the ground. I'll clean some of this stuff up out of the bed into here, and this year's mulch. If you're following along for the next few weeks as we're cutting back some of the shrubs and herbaceous perennials, the things that have kind of died back to the ground, butterfly bushes, kind of woody perennials like butterfly bushes, lantana, all those kinds of things, what you're going to notice is there's bulbs planted underneath them. And so as we're, it's a strategy we use in a very small lot where we can enjoy our bulbs. These hyacinth bulbs are coming back from last year, and I'm going to cut this salvia right here from around it. I'm going to be slightly more gentle with this one just because it's got other things growing around it. And now these bulbs are going to be able to come up, do their thing, flower, and about the time that the foliage is looking awful on them, after they finished flowering, this perennial is going to come up and cover them up. And so I'm never even going to have to worry about cutting back or thinking about the foliage on those hyacinths at all. So that is a strategy we use in this small space, is to underplant herbaceous perennials with spring flowering bulbs. We've got crocus bulbs starting to show some color, and a few daffodils starting to show some color. There'll be tons of that going on over the next few weeks. That's kind of my indicator that I want to get out here and really get cleaned up as quick as possible. I put up a separate video on pruning on hellebores. We prune off the old foliage off the hellebores to just kind of allow them to show off the flowers without all the dead foliage or half dead foliage surrounding them. So it's basically any woody perennial. It's the time to be cutting it back. I'm going to be putting up a separate video on on shrubs, hydrangeas in particular, and some tree pruning, butterfly bush pruning, which could go into the same category. It's time to do those as well. There's going to be several more pruning videos coming up, just showing you how I go about this. There's an anemone right here, and it's actually already got some new growth down at the bottom of it. This is the thing I'm trying to kind of beat, is any of that new growth from the center of that plant getting up in here and preventing and making me have to be more selective in my cuts. So you don't want to be pruning around that. Grasses are another thing we'll be showing as well, and grass-like plants in a separate video. Same thing, you don't want those grasses to be growing up, the new grass to be coming up in the old part that you want to cut out, because you go from being able to just off with its head to having to selectively prune it, which takes a lot more time. But so there you go. There's an anemone cleaned up. There's a limb from this osmanthus trying to ride across the ground. I'll go ahead and take care of that at the same time. And again, I can choose to go ahead and just dice this up, right back into the bed and then mulch over it later, or onto the compost pile, or out to the city, if you want to go that route and send it out that way, off your property. But I realize that a lot of people aren't going to want. We have a very neat and almost really tidy garden in April, May, June, July, August, September, October, and in the winter, I want to take a little bit of a break from it. I want the leaves to just kind of insulate things and protect things. I want the perennials standing and protecting things, allowing the birds to get the seeds. And I want the winter to kind of look like winter, and I don't have to manage it constantly. But now we're jumping back in here in February, and there'll be lots of content related to that. So thanks for following along.